time here with Bedford West. What do you feel is the quality you look for in somebody applying for a QA role?
So just a QA role in general, or like, are we talking the title is QA?
Yeah, I guess that it probably should be.
Because it is.
Let's just start with like QA, like a not so much entry level, but just like a lower level QA role.
Sure. Yeah, so if the title is QA, I'm assuming that like this is an organization that has given that title specifically because they're not looking for like a dedicated set, like an automation engineer, or like they're meaning this to be ownership of quality on the team to some degree. And so for that, like when I've hired for those roles in the past, what I think I look for the most is I think collaboration is super important. Typically, I find QA as a role is much less clearly defined for a given team, especially in the agile world, than development or product roles are in a lot of cases. So by virtue of the fact that it's often not as clearly defined, the person that steps into that role needs to be a self-starter and needs to like be able to collaborate at a very high level, so that as they define the role for themselves, as they work into the role, they're able to communicate that out to the team that they're working with. I think that's pretty essential. So yeah, really just being able to like communicate highly effectively and adapt to what the team is doing, I think is super important.
And how would you like break up that role to make it much more like explicit of what you're looking for?
I think it depends on the needs of the organization. I think QA is a perfectly workable title if there isn't a lot of clarity around what the team needs, but where I'm at now in terms of like QA strategy is if I have ownership over the hiring and the QA strategy for an organization, I think I would want to try and define it more clearly rather than just making it QA, because I would want to have an opinion about how QA should function in the organization, and I'd want the title to reflect that. And to do that more accurately, I think I'd want to give a title that reflects that. So if I'm focused on automation, I would go the set route, right? I would say like software engineer and test, or automation engineer, or something like that. But if I'm really focused on like, I need someone to help this agile team like understand how to test, to identify risks, to like build out tooling to help the team understand where we're at with quality, I might go with like, I know some companies like Blackboard use productivity engineer, right? And I like that for a role that's more focused on the like development enablement kind of focus for the role. So yeah, I think I'd try to look for a more specific title if at all possible. That said, if I'm working with like constraints with an organization where like engineering leadership doesn't fully understand the value of what's coming to the table, or I'm not clear myself like how this role is going to fit in with the team yet, and it needs to like maybe shift one way or the other, I might just leave it as QA, but then maybe let prospective hires know that like there's room for this role to adapt one way or another, and I'd want to know like where their interests are, so that I know if there's a chance this role shifts one direction or the other, they'll still be a good fit for the role.
If you had to go to like an elementary school or like some kind of lower grade school, how would you define what you do?
It's a great question. So I think it's an interesting question for me specifically, because then I have to think of, do I want to describe like QA as a role, or do I want to describe like my role as a manager on a QA team? So I guess it's a lot easier to describe like QA as a role, I think, and I've had to do this, and often not with like children, but like maybe some adults that like haven't worked in technology, right?
Right.
And yeah, I often describe it as like I help make sure that like the software that's being built does what it's supposed to do, is the like elevator pitch basically. And for me specifically, I like to emphasize like the automation piece because that's where more of my interest lies. So I'll talk about how I write software that makes sure the software does what it's supposed to do. Make sure another piece of software does what it's supposed to do. And then I might go into details and say like, so for example, I might write a program that I can run the program, step away, and it'll start like interacting with the website the way a user would. Say something like that.
If you had to, or not had to, but if you could expand your role, how would you do that?
I would definitely focus more on tooling. I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's where we have the biggest need both here at Sprout, but also in the industry in general. I think where I've seen the biggest strides and where I think we have the biggest effect is when we can focus on tooling. And so that's what I mean by tooling is like, how can we help our CI/CD pipelines flow more smoothly? How can we make sure that we're not holding development up, but that we're providing more information during development? How can we reduce the friction for developers to like see the test results and understand what those results mean? How can we help them more seamlessly like run tests locally, not even just during deploys, and just generally gather more information? I think that's the piece that really needs to be focused on, for me at least.
So I know that we've either discussed one-on-one before or in like groups with the other people that we work with, but I'm curious what your feelings are on whether or not there are or aren't differences between a QA role and other roles that we may interact with.
Yeah, definitely. So when you say other roles, do you mean like other quality focused roles like QA versus set, or do you mean like QA versus like other development roles on an Agile
Other
team?
development roles.
Gotcha. I think yes, there definitely are differences. I mean, certainly we make it very clear here with our career bands that like QAs are in one career band, and then we have a separate engineering career band. But just by virtue of the fact that we have a platform chapter, a front end chapter, and a QA chapter, I think it makes it pretty clear they're different. I guess more specifically, like how do I see those differences playing out? Going back to what I described earlier with like clarity of the role, I personally think the QA role here is much less clearly defined than the development roles. And that can be both a good and a bad thing. I think it's a good thing in the sense that like it can really foster a sense of autonomy. So you can join a team and make to a large degree like make your own out of the role. You can kind of determine you have a broad sort of goal or a mission statement within the chapter of like, I need to help increase the quality of the products we're delivering. And how you do that, you have a lot of room to come up with yourself, versus like in the development roles, a lot of times there's items in the backlog, they come into the sprint, you work on those items in the sprint, you help maybe clarify them and hash out the details and maybe like bring up technical debt and decide architecture and things like that. But to a large degree, like what your contributions are to the team are fairly clearly defined. And so that's like the positive aspect. The negative aspect of that to me, like where that can go awry, and what I struggle with personally is like when the expectations aren't completely clear, then sometimes achieving buy-in can also be like equally difficult, because then you have to do a lot of groundwork to help the team come to an agreement about what it is we're trying to solve and where the problems are, and how as a QA like we contribute to those solutions. So you can get a lot of like, in the absence of specified information, developers on the team might say, well, my understanding is as QA you should be doing this, or I feel like this isn't in your purview to do this, right? And so you have to do a lot more work, I feel like, to achieve that buy-in. And so like, yeah, there are pros and cons for sure. But yeah, I think that lack of clarity is where I find the biggest differences to be. And just the nature of the work, like a lot of times there's a lot more of the like, the way we do it here at least, there's a lot more of like the product interaction, the I don't know if I'd say soft skills, but a lot of the like, I'm not sitting down and actively coding. I'm like brainstorming and or problem solving and doing all these things. And I think there's more of that than there is for like the development roles, for example. And I think we see a more similar interaction or a more similar overlap with like product and design sometimes in that regard. So in some ways, I've always thought of like QA as a role when we're talking about QA and not a set role as like living halfway in between like a product role and a dev role.
Is there something, one or more things, I guess, that you like about the QA role, or at least the role you're currently in?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I like about QA as a role. Again, going back to autonomy, I like that I have, to a large degree, like, I'm looked at to be a subject matter expert on quality for the team, and I can pave the path forward for the team about what that looks like. When I'm able to do that, I feel that I'm like happiest in the job, right? Regardless of what form that takes. So I definitely like that aspect of it. I also like that I typically have a broader view of the system. So the impression I get is, as a developer, you tend to like stay focused on one particular feature or feature area for quite a while, often, unless you're maybe like an architect or VP of engineering or something like that, right? You're going to be like honed in on things that you may not have had a lot of choice in being honed in on. Whereas again, with the autonomy with QA, a lot of times you are given some degree of freedom to like organize your day, your sprint how you want, as long as you're testing like the features in the sprint or getting those tested. And there's a lot that goes in with that, especially like the idea of like testing things. But I feel like I tend to have my hands in more of the product than like an average developer might. As a result of that, like I tend to poke at every single piece of the product at some point or another, whereas like developers might only see half of the product or something.
Do you do anything in your free time or during your workday that has a creative nature to it that you use to kind of either break up your day and kind of get yourself back into a focused state?
Yeah, I feel like I have a little bit of a similar answer when I listen to Andy's response to this. There's some similarity there in that I don't tend to stay like super focused on one thing or another. I jump from one thing to another. So like I also play guitar. I like to like draw, doodle. I used to play games a lot more. These days, like programming on the side is the activity that I spend the most time on. We had the game project that we were working on. I really enjoyed that. But even aside from that, like whether it's trying to bring up my own personal website or just like brush up on coding skills or try to learn a new language, that's what I really enjoy doing. And I think I really enjoy the like exercising the analytical portion of my brain, and I don't genuinely feel like in the what I do day to day in my job these days I get to exercise that much. It's just like the logic analytical portion is largely turned off because the nature of what I'm doing here is less like that, and it's more like I don't know if creative is the right word, but like procedural or something. So I like being able to like dig into a problem really in depth and try to like solve a problem in my spare time, and that's what programming gives me that I don't so much get in my day to day here. So, it helps, and it also helps keep those skill sets fresh.
Do you think there's one of those activities that you are more likely to engage in to have that sort of greater effect on you, or at least a greater positive effect on you?
Yeah, on the programming side in general, that's that's true, because like I said, I want to focus on that analytical piece in my spare time, and the programming definitely gives me that. Within programming, it's nice to focus on like trying to do something new, I think. So that's why like learning languages definitely appeals to me in that way. But also things like coding katas, where you're given a problem and you just try to like approach the problem in different ways. I really enjoy those as well, because that there's no way to not get analytical with that and to not like really stretch your brain. And so I prefer that kind of exercise more to like, for example, on the game project, there was some of that when I would try to do something new with it, right? Like we were reading effective Java, when I tried to like take things from effective Java and apply it to the game, that provided some of that. But after you try those things and you just get into like the production mode, it's really becoming more of a like creative outlet at that point, as opposed to like a more of a analytical exercise, which is what again, because I tend to use like the creative outlets more at work, I'm really looking for the analytical piece outside of work.
Do you feel like there's something that you can look back on either in your childhood or just when you were younger that you could see kind of led you up to what you're doing now? Is it like one aspect that you kind of are like, oh, you know, I was very analytical as a child and that's followed me up through my career?
Yeah, so there certainly are a lot of things that I can point to in my childhood to say like, oh, this was an analytical activity. I mean, I enjoyed math. I went into physics as a major because I enjoyed math, and those sorts of things. You know, playing with Legos, things like that, and even video games. I think there's a degree of that. It's hard to say if any of those, and like chess, I also enjoyed chess when I was a child, but it's hard to say if they relate to each other at all. Like, did this career appeal to me because I did those things, or is it like this is just a personality trait and there's a connection between like, because this is a personality trait, I enjoyed those things as a kid and I enjoyed this as work. I'm not sure what the like cause and effect is there, but yeah, certainly like those sorts of things, math, physics, video games, stuff like that. I think they're similar, related.
Yeah. Do you think would you like to kind of go through your professional career from like where you started to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, for school I did physics and math. Realized I didn't really want to do those as a profession. Like I was going to grad school for math, and I just kind of got bored of it. And I thought like I've always tinkered around with computers when I was younger, so I wanted to kind of think about doing that as a career. I had a couple of internships where I was like a research assistant, where I did some development work when I was still in college. When I got out, I had a friend who was also a math major who worked at an Air Force base as a contractor, and she did the like statistics for a dedicated test organization that tested like mission planning aircraft software for the Air Force. So she was leaving and actually connected me to the job that I was able to get there. She recommended me for it, and I was there for about 5 years. It was a huge system of systems waterfall contracting organization where I was working for a dedicated test organization of like, there were probably 50 of us, and all of us were testing. Most of them were military veterans, Air Force veterans, and there were a few of us that were engineers. So that was pretty different. It was a huge waterfall, like very high budget like type stuff. From there, I wanted to grow in my career. I really wasn't like growing much after a few years there. So I moved to Chicago to look for career growth, just to get out of the South. And then I started working for Solstice, which is here in Chicago, still around. They're a mobile consulting firm, so they build mobile applications for enterprise clients. Yeah. I led some QA initiatives there, so I was doing mostly mobile testing, mostly manual. I started to work on building out an Appium automation framework for them, and then I left shortly after to pursue a more technical role. So I went to University of Chicago, started as QA engineer, became the QA lead there, hired on some QA engineers, took over their like DevOps platform, built out some Appium automation, did a lot of data testing there, data and API testing, since it was a big on-prem data lake, basically. Then I came here, and I've been a QA manager here, and we do a few different things. We do some Selenium, we do some REST assured API testing, we do some exploratory testing, and then a few different things related to that. But a large piece of what I do here is like people management, which has been nice. This has been the biggest like people management focused role I've had as well. So,
Do you think, as like kind of a last question, is there any sort of thing you would want to kind of pass off to others, possibly looking into a testing or QA focused career, that you feel like would like set them on, whether it's the right path or a path that could like see whether or not that's something that they really want to explore?
Definitely. I think that describes QA as a career path pretty well in general, and the way I would say is dabble. Like it's a great role because of the autonomy we have in a lot of cases. It's a great role to dabble with, and what I mean by that is I think it's easy for people to settle into the role and just like get into a routine of, I'm going to learn more about testing and how to test, and I'm just going to kind of test things very effectively, and that's great. It provides value, but there's so much opportunity to dabble in, whether it's project management or being a product owner or automation or like picking up some knives in development. I mean, a lot of stuff like I've seen you do here. You'll pick up like pieces of different roles and experiment with that, and I think that's being in QA. There's a lot of opportunity for that. And a lot of recognition too. I think a lot of times in organizations, people don't know what to expect from QA. So when you help out and like pick up a dev item, for example, and like help the dev team complete something, you get a lot of positive recognition.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people move into QA not from development roles. So it's good to like experiment with either, like I said, project management, product ownership, or development, and see how much you enjoy those things. Because as a career, you can certainly stick through QA and become like a QA director, but there's so many other opportunities as well, and it's good to explore.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the conversation, and we'll have to do some more. I have some more ideas of other things I'd like to try.
Sounds great. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.